to me. I love the things you say.
Welcome to Dialogue, KSFR's Friday evening call-in show, where the conversation starts with you. I'm your host, MK. I've decided to take this show into the field to talk one-on-one with you, the listener. So if you've got a story to tell or comment to share, please contact me at my email address, which is dialogue@ksfr.org. I'll also be reading people's emails aloud and sharing them on the show, so please feel free to write me. You know how much I enjoy keeping the dialogue going and inviting all voices to the table, even those I might disagree with. I've always said it's an opinion show, so share yours with me. I want to hear it. I decided to make it my primary mission to speak especially to those who often go unseen and unheard, invalidated and shamed, and those most invisible. So, for the past few weeks, I've been talking to those who carry one of the most shunned and negative labels in the Western world, those who are deemed, quote-unquote, mentally ill. From children dealing with ADHD and juvenile bipolar disorder to those diagnosed with social anxiety, and perhaps the most stigmatized of all, those who suffer from what is often termed schizophrenia or psychosis. But in speaking to them, and some of the revolutionary people who are treating and investigating them, I've discovered an entirely new community throughout the world, 100,000 members and going strong, paving the way toward a completely new understanding of what we call mental illness. They're a group that's interested in not just changing how we define it, but the very paradigm of care. In fact, some of these groundbreaking folks have decided to drop the labels because they claim they often do more damage than good, and that the number of increasing labels born from the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, are nothing more than a move toward medicalizing the human condition. While conventional wisdom argues that these diagnoses are based in quote-unquote biochemical imbalance, there are a growing number of scientists and journalists who claim that this is nothing more than a brilliant and exploitive misinformation and ad campaign to sell pharmaceutical drugs at the cost of not just ruining and disabling countless lives, but also taking them in growing numbers. Furthermore, they argue that no actual scientific evidence exists to biologically prove a chemical imbalance. But even if we were to think of these so-called illnesses as biologically based, is the broad range of human experience born from the mind really something that can be so easily quantified? Or is this really about our desire to simplify the unknown, that which we find scary, so we keep it at bay? But what mystery and magic do we leave behind in the process? After all, once we find all the answers in life, doesn't it just get boring? Isn't the unknown and the drive to understand a part of what fuels our very existence? And can the human mind be controlled? Is it not on some level connected to something deeper, something more like the soul, or perhaps even the spirit if it exists? In getting to know some of these so-called patients and their families, I've learned more about how little their so-called illnesses have to say about them, and how much more they say about us and our fear, our desires to oversimplify, control, and categorize, so we don't have to look at our own shadow side. After all, who among us is immune from at least one quirky, out-of-control, or maybe overly controlling behavior? Are so-called mental patients merely handy scapegoats in an overly busy and high-pressured world where consumption and materialism seem to reign supreme, and putting our problems off on the proverbial other is the easiest solution, where rationality and simple kindness are fast becoming scarce resources? Crazy is the new buzzword often used to describe people we don't feel like dealing with. Makes us feel better about ourselves. But that word can strip a person of their very credibility, and now we have a literal diagnosis and corresponding prescription to go with it. It's been proven in studies that those who ostracize others actually suffer more damage than those who get ostracized. As Robert Whitaker often reminds us, what other area in healthcare do we actively and purposefully ignore the patient's voice in their own treatment or condition, but that in the world of mental health? And according to many of the patients I've spoken with, these so-called present experts seem to be raking in greater profits than any sound or lasting cures. The good news is that there's a new legion of pioneers who are coming together to bring a voice to these patients. They're proposing a notion that our current model of care is just ineffective, antiquated, irrelevant, disconnected, and potentially extremely harmful. Some claim the current mental health care system is the very definition of insanity, one that has only learned to perfect the engineering of only more insanity. There are a growing number of scientists and experts in fields ranging from psychiatry, neurology, psychology, sociology, biology, anthropology, religion, even philosophy, who are arguing that our current paradigm of care is not scientifically based nor effective, but in need of desperate change, tragically broken, and it requires a change that involves compassion, caring, non-judgment, and above all, inclusion, one that invites a variety of perspectives to the table from the cultural to religious to scientific. It's an approach that chooses to rehumanize rather than dehumanize, or as renowned therapist Kermit Cole says, where therapy becomes about restoring our humanity together. Last week I spoke with a young man who suffers from so-called psychosis, a term I stubbornly seem to hold on to despite his request to re-term it as someone who hears voices. My lack of being able to easily adapt his new terms only reflected how deeply these names are ingrained in our very thinking, even to those who wish to do better like myself. But learning can happen, and I have them to thank. Yes, I'll admit, I was guilty. I was one of those people who was afraid of those seemingly strange-looking people standing on the street corner talking to themselves as if someone is really there. But I'm not any longer. In fact, now I welcome their conversations, even seek them out. It's been suggested since the 17th century that they may have nothing more than a case of being able to dream while being awake. An increasing number of scientific studies are finding a correlation between the dream state and so-called psychosis, along with circadian rhythm disruptions. It's common knowledge that sleep deprivation alone causes psychosis. What if science discovers that it's as simple as some form of sleep disorder brought on by stress? But even if it's not, seeing it from this perspective changed my entire approach. Suddenly, like a light bulb, I could relate. In an instant, my fear was gone. Who among us hasn't had a terrifying nightmare that felt really real, or had a dream that was difficult to wake up from? What if this was their experience? The unknown now became familiar, and if anything, now I just had the desire to want to talk to them, reach out, help them redirect that potential nightmare into something more positive, comfort them. I could see how stigmatizing someone in the middle of that kind of experience would only make it worse, much less putting them away against their will, by force. A kinder, gentler approach just makes sense, and that's exactly what this new revolutionary group of cutting-edge experts is proposing, a literal open dialogue, not one where people are shut down and shut away. I now refer to so-called psychosis as a state of being, one I prefer to describe as dreaming while awake, simply because it seems to be a rather accurate description from those I've spoken with who've experienced it. There's also a peer advocacy group called Hearing Voices, and they prefer to call themselves voice hearers. I've created my own terms called awake dreamers, simply because it makes them relatable. I guarantee if each of us were caught acting out our dreams, that would be a vulnerable place to be. We'd all look a little bizarre and strange. Dreams are strange, fragmented, overwhelmingly emotional, and sometimes completely unemotional. Sometimes our brains can even do incredibly brilliant things they can't normally do while awake. In fact, certain areas of our brain use 200% more brain power while we're dreaming than when we're awake. Maybe this is why in dreams I can compose full musical orchestrations. Dreams are our entry into what's glorious, what's wondrous, even magical, and yes, at times, nightmarish. But really what they are is a reflection of what's going on inside us, about the world around us. Dreams are how we humans process reality. That in and of itself can be a daunting task. This week I had the pleasure of talking to an extraordinary woman with an incredible intellect and intuition, a gracious and giving heart, a committed wife, and above all, a woman of passion and curiosity, and a highly devoted and loving mother. She has read every book in the universe on this topic and is without question an expert in her own right, through her lived experience as well as her professional training. She was driven by the desire to find the answer that would end her son's suffering. Trying to simplify one of the most complex and traumatic human challenges a person can face is not an easy task, but in the end her answer is rather simple. It involves choosing to embrace all parts of ourselves, learning to comfortably live within the mystery and embrace it with the sound knowledge and faith that the answer will come. To learn to breathe into our experiences, delve and uncover, ask questions and learn. Allow ourselves to be open and even uncomfortable, and learn to go with it, see where it takes us, and above all, not to panic, but rather allow ourselves to ultimately maybe even redefine, reframe. Her son Niko dreams while he's awake, so much so that he often doesn't choose words to speak with, but he's still more present than most people I know. He enters the room and emanates kindness, curiosity, humor, a listening ear, courage, involvement, interaction, wisdom, fortitude, and strength. He was referred to at one point as being perhaps one of the worst cases in the state. I now prefer to call him one of the most imaginative, creative, innovative, and courageous minds around. Rather than being someone who is shunned, I see him as someone to be cherished, and one we can stand to learn from. This is his story, told through the passionate words of his loving mother.
He was 20 years old, he was going to college, he was a rapper, he was had lots of friends, he was incredibly interested in every far out thing. And he took some psilocybin mushrooms, and then he had one of the worst psychotic breaks ever. He would have been considered severe and persistent and one of the worst cases in New Mexico. He went through a really horrendous so-called mental illness. And at that point in time, 13 years ago, in 15 minutes, they diagnose you, you're drugged, they lock the parents out. They just say, if they're psychotic, they're a danger to yourself or others. They could hurt somebody. Basically giving him a life sentence. You're mentally ill forever. You are defective. You're psychotic. You're on this medicine for life. And I said, I didn't want to do it. And then they said, well, then we'll take him away and put him in protective custody. So then they just send him down, and Niko was screaming, I don't want to do this. And I have rights and whatever, and nope, you don't have a single bit of rights.
What was that like for you?
It was just horrific. We just about died every minute. I mean, we were crying. It's been almost 13 years of just pure, absolute dread and horror. What we went through was just unbelievable. It was a huge amount of stress. Mm-hmm. And that it would heal him. The more they up the dose, the more it gets rid of the psychosis. Then he'll go back to work and everything will be fine. And he can have a girlfriend, he could get a job, go back to school.
Did you believe it?
We did.
But Niko did not get better. And he's not alone. Of the 1.5 million people diagnosed with this condition this year, many share his experience. It ranks among the top 10 causes of disability in developed countries. While they account for 1% of the actual population, they account for a fourth of all mental health care costs, at over $41 billion a year. Many of them suffer from depression, but how much of this is born from the sheer effects of social isolation that comes from being stigmatized? While the medical establishment claims that their treatments work, and for some they do, even touting them as literal lifesavers, there's a large percentage of patients that actually disagree, that suffer innumerable side effects, and in many ways only see the conditions worsen. This was the case with Niko.
He was going in and out of hospitalization. Mm-hmm. He was on the drugs, out on the street, worrying that somebody's going to pick him up, that somebody could hurt him. We thought, oh no, what's wrong with him? His body and his mind was completely frozen. You think, oh my God, he's got catatonia, he can't move. Horrific amount of madness.
So in some ways, you saw the symptoms getting worse, it sounds like, not better.
Yeah, oh no, we saw a huge amount of worsening of symptoms.
Is it
Cognitive impairment is what you see.
He was hallucinating more or less?
More.
Or more on
And
these drugs?
every kind of hallucination you could imagine. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. This is your beloved child, and he is in dire straits every minute of his life. You just couldn't believe. We just couldn't believe it, the whole thing happened, or that it was happening,
Yeah.
So it was horrific beyond description.
People who suffer this condition often revolve between hospitals, prisons, and shelters. In the U.S., they constitute a third of the homeless population, and they experience a 50 times greater risk of attempted suicide. So clearly you are coming to the conclusion that this is not working.
It's just a total and utter lie. They're still hearing voices. They're still hallucinating. It doesn't work. And so most people that go through that system like we have, they just say, it doesn't work. It didn't take away his hallucinations. It didn't do what they said. In retrospect, I keep thinking, well, maybe it was the drug making it look like that.
And her suspicions have been confirmed by author and science journalist Robert Whitaker in his book Anatomy of an Epidemic. He lays out the documented scientific action of these drugs on the actual brain. Many patients don't like the effects of the drugs, so often go on and off of them between hospitalizations. Turns out what science reveals is that what we've been seeing as the quote-unquote disease returning as people come off these drugs may in fact be no more than withdrawal symptoms from highly addictive drugs that often only worsen the condition. When Niko's mother discovered this book, it resonated with her experience, and science has known this for years. The pharmaceutical companies have failed to reveal this information.
A lot of the symptoms, the stiffness and the zombifying effect and all this, even the cognitive impairment, now I realize it was the drug. But back then, I just thought I better go along with everybody because it's more disruptive to go against the whole society. I could get really mad, but I just see it as, this is how we dealt with all this.
Because this was basically the system that you were given.
We didn't realize the drug was making him get all stiff like that. We're like, oh, he's turning into a zombie, something's terribly wrong with him. They don't admit that it's their drug doing that. The antipsychotic is antidopamine. It pretty much numbs out your whole front lobe, which is your judgment, and the spark in the nerve in your muscles. So it's just, the brain is just being set off, and it takes away the other psychosis, and you're stimulating different parts of the brain, which makes on another psychosis. If you don't have your front lobe, you can't make judgments and then say, oh, he has lack of judgment. Well, no wonder he doesn't have a front lobe. And they won't admit that their drugs do that, or that any of that is their fault. They say in the New York Times there was an article, cadres of cognitively impaired people, and they can't move, and then sometimes they stick them out on the streets. The homeless, a third of the homeless, and they're just frozen on these drugs. And then they stick them out on the streets. I mean, even if you were going to put people on such a drug, Hoffer, from Orthomolecular says that they should be institutionalized. But they weren't institutionalized. They said, oh, they're better now. It's just that they market these things and they have this idea that they're just going to up the dose until the hallucinations go away. So it's an attack on the human brain, the visualizing human brain. But dopamine, L-DOPA, that's what it does. Those are very hard to regulate. They're hard to get the right dose. It's almost impossible. He didn't have any sense of reality. He didn't have any way to pick up a raisin to save his life. He couldn't do anything. He didn't know what anything was.
And this is when he was on the drugs.
Yeah.
That were supposed to be helping him.
Yeah. Makes the perfect mentally ill patient. Perfect.
But how much of this is reflected by our approach that critics argue only worsens the condition? And when we're dealing in the unknowns of human existence, human beings are known to either vilify or sanctify those who are so apparently different. And cultural context cannot be ignored. While we stigmatize and fear them, there are other cultures who revere them and consider their abilities to hold special value to the larger spiritual community. And let's say we go along with this idea of dreaming while they're awake. It could be said that they have a special 24/7 access to the unconscious, and maybe even the collective unconscious that Carl Jung spoke of, that shares similar imagery across all cultures. Perhaps they do have something to teach us. But what if we could treat them as just simply human beings, just like us, whose difference may just be more obvious to those of ours that are so easily hidden? Imagine a world where we were less afraid, where we could allow them to talk about their dreams, process and understand them together. There is such a community out of the Netherlands that is practicing a therapy called open dialogue, and they experience an 80% cure rate. When you saw him in that psychotic state, would you say that was like being in a dream state?
Oh, yes, totally.
Almost like they're literally living their dream.
They are, yeah. It seems like they're just totally living on their inner stimula. And that's why, psychotic people aren't really that dangerous, because they're completely absorbed with their inner world. And so you could just, you can walk around and hide anywhere you want, because they can't really even see you. They're just kind of, that's why it's most, schizophrenic people, or so-called schizophrenic, they're not dangerous. But if you try to get them out of their psychosis, or say, stop acting like that, or bump into them, then they can really lash out and go, oh, and then, if somebody bumps into them, or if you get too close to them.
Now, what about the idea of locking them away against their will? Do you think that adds to the potential violence?
Well, they only lock them now for 2 days or 2 weeks. It's $30,000 for 2 weeks. And the whole thing is confusing. They're not putting you in a beautiful, peaceful environment. You're in a madhouse. And all this is happening to you. And you should, if you're going to retrain somebody's brain, you should put them in a beautiful, peaceful place with a huge amount of wonderful sensory things going on. But no. And then they're not really putting you in a good environment. So that was up to us to try to get them back home, and then try to take them to the sunsets, take them to the river, take them here and there and here and there. So little by little, those moments of clarity all add up to sanity. But you're working on this drug. Now, if you had somebody not on that drug, that would be a whole different, wonderful way. You could just contain them, like a continuum of care. You contain them when they're really irate or upset, and then, then you calm them down. Like, you can put them in a sanatorium. They stop making adrenaline. They don't make mescalines. They're calming down. They're not making stress chemicals. That's a huge way to calm the whole thing down.
Because apparently what you found out was that stress chemicals can actually induce hallucination.
Because stress chemicals turn into hallucinogens. They turn into especially mescaline. Adrenaline turns to mescaline. There's 40 stress chemicals. DMT, is when you're dying. There's, your body makes those because when you're stressed, then you can just, calm down. It's just baloney. You can't just take out psychosis, because the images are forming in their psyches for what's around them. And so the way to get rid of them would be to have wonderful, beautiful things, and then the dreams would start becoming beautiful. They're longing to be included, and now they're just excluded, and everything about it is making more stress. If you stick them on the streets, they get attacked or by a dog, or they're just getting more and more psychotic. Or if they go into their room, they become more and more withdrawn.
This system wasn't working. It seemed as though, it sounds to me that it sounds like it was a rather traumatic situation.
Oh, there's no words for it. It's just unbelievable. When you lose your mind, and then your beloved child doesn't know what they're doing, that's very scary.
I'm talking to Niko's mother about dealing with her son's psychosis, or more aptly termed, a son who hears voices. We'll be right back after these short messages.
Talk to me. Talk to me. I love the things you say. Talk to me. Talk to me in your own.
And we're back. You're listening to Dialogue, and today we're talking to Niko's mother, a woman dealing with what's often termed psychosis or schizophrenia. However, the new, more preferred term is simply one who hears voices. Niko and his family have been dealing with this condition for nearly 13 years, and in that process, they've watched their mental health care services and options changed to only fewer choices that Niko's mother strongly believes only increase the damage and trauma. Institutionalization is more commonly now replaced by drugs, which the health industry touts as a huge success. Niko's mother couldn't disagree more.
People say, put them in an institution. Oh, they just don't do that. They just drug them, stick them out on the streets. You might as well send them to the gas chamber because,
It just didn't work.
It didn't work for him anyway. Some people seem to be able to function on it, but not for him.
Mm-hmm. So as he's, and I think what I'm trying to get at, what I'm wondering about is when you put someone away against their will, is that part of what can cause a violent reaction?
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine if I was dreaming and I was in his state where I'm dreaming while I'm awake. That's the best analogy we have to understand this, right?
Yeah.
If I'm dreaming while I'm awake and there's a whole bunch of people ganging up around me and then putting me away against my will, that would make me actually want to resist.
They would get 8 bruiser guys, knock them down, 8 bruiser guys, knock them down, knock them down, knock them down until they become compliant. And so basically you've made that person into a mentally ill person. They're saying it's because they're so psychotic that it's worth it. You know what I mean? But I don't think so. I think it deteriorates that person's will. They completely break their will. And so they do need containment. It is too difficult for a parent to deal with. They might need some bruiser guys to hold them or, put them in a quiet room. But the thing is, they're never all mad or never all totally insane. So you can always reach them. You can talk to the parents. They get locked out. There's other ways of doing this, but this was a lot like a neuroleptic Nazi. It was like they're defective and we're just, they're just scum, and so we're just kind of ridding society of this nuisance, this person that's hurting people, that could possibly hurt people because they're psychotic.
And the going, did he put up more of a fight when they tried to get him down? I mean, when they say, well, they're violent, isn't that part of where the violence is born?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, because, at a certain point, they just lose it. They don't remember anymore what to do, and they just, take their pills immediately. And you can say that was the process. But because of the way society treats these hypersensitive, intuitive children, that's what makes them, because Niko was totally peace and light and joy, and we were peace and light and joy. There was no trauma or stress, but I think because of society, the way they react to them, and because they don't really know what's happening, they're getting all these weird things happening to them, then that's where I had to sometimes just give him a huge amount of room and just lock the doors and keep him in, because nobody was going to help us. And they were just going to drug him more and more until he died, or drop him out on the street. And if we hadn't taken care of him, he would have just died. Every one day he would have died. So we just had to take care of him. You can't just turn your back on somebody, in psychosis. You have to there's a certain way to deal with them, but you can deal with them.
So clearly the system sort of wasn't working. It was getting worse. It was...
it never worked. It never did. Yeah, you either have the positive symptoms or the negative symptoms, and the everything that's in their life is negative. So their psyche's making images that are like, what's wrong? I need a friend.
It seems that it would feed those images, and
yeah, I told him work with the system because now we're here. Now he's gotten to this. Once you put him on those drugs, if you take them off, they'll go mad. So then they say, see, they're mad. So they say it's the best scam in the world today. And so this syndrome, we get caught in this predicament of perpetual madness. And it's, partly their own madness. Their own brain starts making dopamine in all weird places. All these things compound to make a very nice mentally ill patient. And you think, oh, we can't ever get out of this. This is just, we're stuck in here. you know.
But then you decided, we're going to do this differently. We're going to take charge.
Really, the family, the hearing voice people and the open dialogue are the only first people that are saying, no, listen to their psychosis, listen to their hallucinations and their delusions, talk to them. No.
So how did you discover that?
This is 13 years later. We just discovered this about a year ago. And it was a counselor at LifeLink, and he was a miraculous person, and he started to say there's a support group for hearing voices, and he noticed he was hearing voices. And then these people got people from all over the world, and they met with us. That was Kermie and Louisa. And they had us come as a main example of a family that's going through that. And they worked with us. And they worked with Niko. And they said, Niko, you're not psychotic. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a voice hearer.
So they're very susceptible to suggestion.
Hyper-suggestible.
Oh,
I read this whole book,
interesting.
the Origin of Consciousness and the Bicameral Mind, and it talked about it's a lot like being in hypnosis. But when he said, "There's nothing wrong with you," don't even use that word psychosis. He just became normal.
Wow.
And we've, after all this wonderful care and kindness and making little cubbies and letting him sleep and sleep and sleep. And
so at that point, then you decided to say, we're going to take him into our own care. And what did that look like?
That's when we got in touch with the Recovering Sanity people, Edward Podvell. This was my Bible. You can see I read every word, and it has techniques for parents to work with, and you start a team. Like anybody who's in suicide or in an elder who's sick or somebody that's in drug addiction and they're about to destroy themselves, you just put a team around them. You watch them 24/7, and this is what we've kept up all this time. And we don't let him out of our sight. He can go down to the plaza. He can walk around. He ditches us sometimes. He knows where he is, but. This book and Trungpa from the Naropa, who wrote the book Crazy Wisdom, Chogyam Trungpa, there was a film about him, and I went to go see it, and then he died. And I started to cry so hard, I thought my heart was going to break. It was because I loved Trungpa so much, because he was the one person that he's just like, get them out in society, keep them out. Walk them, and so I take him to the plaza every day, and that's where I developed into like a clown, and I would joke, and then I've been working in the psych wards, and I've been working with severe cognitively impaired people for the last 13 years because of all that. I just seem to be thrown into that world, and that's when I realized they're so beautiful, so peaceful. I mean, people that hardly have any brains at all, they're in sort of like a soul level, what I would call. And I'd play a little flute, and they'd all wave their hands, and I mean, there's a whole way of. I was getting my master's degree in family systems, and I was focusing on nonverbal communication and severe cognitive impairment, and so I was trying to become a state guardian, and I had my degree in psychology, art therapy, and so I was studying all these things like crazy. I was looking into everything. And the amazing things turn out to be the most human. That humans, when he's with his dad, he gets so calm and so happy. And we include him, and we love him, and we walk with him, and we don't let him go, Yeah. We don't just think, oh, he's just a piece of human refuge, that's just unacceptable, undesirable. No, he's a really special person, and we actually have grown. We've become better people. I say he's my best teacher, and then he had one friend that just worked with him for 4 years, Jimmy, and he was the most incredible person I've ever known. I mean, he stood by his friend. It was his best friend from high school. And he worked with him at his worst. And, I mean, I'll never forget Jimmy. You don't just give a bunch of money to somebody or put them on drugs. No, you have people. You need strong people, like anybody. These wonderful guys from Texas, or people that have been to Naropa, the students. And you go with the person, you be with them, you eat with them, you work with them, you walk with them. And you don't let them, if they're with insane people, they'll just like pick up more and more insane habits. But if they're with sane people, they will, little by little, every sane experience, every happy experience, every kind person, it starts to make them, you seduce them back to reality. If you work with them, then they become more, they come more and more back into reality.
And so this idea of the calmer, gentler approach you discovered after sort of becoming disillusioned with the system as it exists now.
Yeah.
And realizing it really just wasn't working. For all it was touting that it was working, it just wasn't. And so how did you discover these people? Was it books? And you said you were studying.
Well, Transforming Madness was the one that it showed all the different things, you know. And
you just sort of took
this Transforming Madness that led me to Trungpa.
And how did you discover open dialogue?
And that was my friend, Louisa and Kermit, the ones that come on your show. They were the ones that told me about it.
They told you about open dialogue.
Actually, my brother called me and said, "Did you ever hear about open dialogue? It's a new system." And then I went to the workshop.
And that has an 80% cure rate.
Experts all over the world. She says, "I wanted to bring these experts from all over the world just to help you. And I want to help your family." And I was just like, you know, that is so nice, because, you know, instead of just saying this person is a castaway, she would say, "No, we're going to get all the experts of the world to come and help you."
Oh,
and they did help us. You know, they're not, the psychiatrists are not, you know, really all bad or anything. It's just they just wish and wanted to have something to cure it, but it just doesn't, you know.
Yeah.
They wish that they all say, "We only have a few drugs," or "We wish we had better drugs," you know, but they're trying to make a mental thing into a physical, and that's the whole thing is wrong from the very beginning.
Yeah. The paradigm feels like it's different, like it's wrong.
Well, like Carl Jung and Freud, they kind of made a mistake. In a way, they were trying to make it a science, as hard and as diagnosable as a physical science. And everybody bought into it, but it's just not true.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not. It's not like diagnosing a bone or a kidney or, you know, an eye, something like that.
Because it's a complex, it's not just the brain, it's also the mind.
The mind, and the mind has a huge amount of
facets, and also our understanding of these illnesses from a cultural standpoint.
Yes.
So, but I mean the idea of defining mental illness rather than just a biological disease, and only that.
Yes.
It is important to look at the cultural context or the social influences that can make it better or worse, even if it were biological.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been thinking, even if it was biological, the system, do you think the system, the way in which we handle these so-called illnesses is actually effective or helping the situation?
I don't think so. To call it an antipsychotic and to say that it will cure people of psychosis, that's wishful thinking. It is not true whatsoever. It's just a magic bullet, and they wanted to have something like penicillin that worked on the mind and that they could say they healed. And I mean, these things are, $80 billion involuntary drugging and $200 billion, it's a huge business. So antipsychotics, antidepressants, and anti-anxiety. And the anti-anxiety was one of the worst things to ever get off. So these are disconnecting certain parts of the brain. There's the same as chemical lobotomy. These are disconnecting major parts of your neurotransmitters and your brain system. Not only do they not cure them, but they make all of these things 1,000 times worse. And they did studies from the old days where psychotic people used to go in to a psych ward. They'd be out in 3 months and back into society. Or the depression people. All these things weren't chronic, lifetime illnesses like they are. Well, like, for instance, Niko, he took his medicine dutifully every day, just the way the doctor prescribed it. And as you know, if he gets to 15 years, then you know the amount of severe brain damage is going to be so cognitively impairing, and then also dopamine starts springing up in other parts of your brain and things like that, that you know he may never ever be able to get off of these. But we've been working. We got onto Clozaril. We stepped down from 4 dopamine receptors to 1, and now we're on. We're going to start today incremental steps, and we're going to try to get them off. So the bottom line is, people wanted it to work. The point is, it just doesn't work. It really doesn't.
So when you saw the symptoms in him getting worse, was there a part of you, before you knew about Robert Whitaker's book or had read anything really on it, just in terms of your own intuition, was there ever a feeling that you suspected the drugs might be making it worse, or did you always think it was the disease?
Well, I'm a natural healing person. We don't use drugs, and we got forced, he got forced on him through that involuntary drugging. But I did believe it was a chemical imbalance, and I did believe that it was him that was doing all those things, and I thought, oh, we can never get him off. If he'll just get better, then I could get him off. But in a million years, I never suspected that the drug itself was causing all those symptoms. I blamed it on him, and I thought it was him, and then I thought, oh, these drugs, I didn't really totally blame the drugs. But now that I read Whitaker and he explained each chemical compound, that is exactly what those drugs do. And so now I know that the drugs are making all his symptoms, and so making
them worse.
I'll tell Niko, there's nothing wrong with you, Niko. All those symptoms, everything you went through, that was the drug itself making that happen. And then he just goes, whoa, like the whole load is,
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with you. It was really the drug.
Yeah.
And the only people that ever get better and recover are the people that are strong enough to get off of them at some point.
Yeah.
And not saying if you get off of them quickly, you'll go mad. So you can't just, easily get off of them. It can be, years, like 4 years sometimes of just total hell. And these are terrible drugs to get off of, and you can die getting off of them. But we're working with the Community Guidance Center, and we're working with his hearing voice support counselor and his hearing support group. He's learning how to manage the hallucinations and the voices just by talking about them and working with them.
So that's where you stand now. You're starting to look into other better alternative therapies.
Yeah. And pretty much we were so docile and so obedient, and we've wasted like 10 years, really, thinking that, somehow the drug was going to help. And then all of a sudden we just realized it's not helping, and it's never going to make the voices go away. It's ineffective, and in fact, as you're on them longer, it does severe cognitive impairment.
But the good news is now we know what the problem was caused by.
Yeah.
The drugs. And it might have been a momentary crisis, or as Robert Whitaker talks about in his book, an episode that caused some hallucination. And even if it were to go on, there are ways to manage that and manage the voices so that it doesn't become...
Yeah. Well,
Niko.
75% of the people used to spontaneously heal and get the psychosis would disappear, and in a few years it was never a long-term thing. The only thing that's making it, what you have now, is the drugs. It makes an unstable brain, no matter how much they say that we stabilized it. It's constantly creating psychosis. As soon as a little bit wears out, or something happens, you're just constantly going through the revolving door, and you're relapsing and then getting healed, relapsing. And
partially because you're going on the drug, then off the drug. And when they go off the drug, you can mistake the withdrawal symptoms for the disease returning.
Yeah, they say it's the biggest scam in the world today, because if you get off the drug, you go crazy. Then they say, see, you're crazy. You have to take this for life. Because at the very beginning, I says, oh, well, we'll keep him on that for a couple months till his psychosis squares off or something. And the psychiatrist said, no, for life. And the thing is that you can't go much more than 15 years without severe cognitive impairment, and then it turns into Alzheimer's, it turns out.
But we're gonna
so
remain hopeful. We caught it in good time.
Yeah. So we're, we've already, lowered it from Zyprexa that has 4 dopamine receptors numbed out to 1 and Clozaril. So we've taken that far. So now we're going to take the next step and just little by little, increment by increment, with the doctor, with the psychiatrist, lower it. And once we were sure about it, the psychiatrist said, okay. And once, our hearing voice person says, there's no reason to be on it because it's not helping the problem, which is he heard voices. Hearing voices is not a disease. And Ron Coleman's looked at Niko and he says...
Now, who's Ron Coleman?
And he's the one that he's one of the main world experts. And he was a mentally ill patient for 10 years, and he got out of it, and then he recovered completely.
Okay.
So, anyway, so he told Niko, he says, Niko, you're not schizophrenic. He says, your voice hearer. And then he said, there's nothing wrong with you. And then I said, well, maybe he can get a little recovery, like maybe he could be able to, make his bed or, take a shower or something. And he said, no, he can have complete recovery. And then when we told Niko that, he just like, telling somebody there's something wrong with them, that they're genetically defective, that their mind is, defective. It's horrible. And then when you have all those symptoms, can you imagine you have no front lobe and you have no control over your muscles, they're just stiff. And people, you say, let's get rid of stigma, but if you see somebody like that, I mean, of course people are like, oh, what's that? They just don't have any idea what is going on. I always suspected that all these symptoms were not really him. Because I know, Mother, your son, that, he was a beautiful, spiritual, vivacious, joyful person. And you're just like never giving up that your son is there,
Yeah.
And he is really there still. We laugh, we do lots of things, but I always knew it intuitively, but I always thought, oh God, I just can't risk it because they'll put you on those things, but they won't take you off of them in the psych wards. And that's what you really need is containment when you're in psychosis, or 24/7 watch over, or you need a team, like we had a Windhorse team to watch over 24/7.
Okay,
or
so
you need to be in a psych ward, where they can watch over it. And when you're going off the medicines, you need to be contained and in a thing like that. But they won't do it, so we have to do that at home.
Because they won't contain him beyond.
They won't contain him while you're getting off of them. It's very, very, very tricky getting off of these things.
So that there's no support system to help him get off of them.
No.
If you go to the hospital and say, "Hey, I would like to have your help having him come off the drugs," there is no support system there to help him get off the drugs.
They absolutely won't do it. They'll just say you have to do that at home with your psychiatrist. But the whole thing is risky, and you take huge risks. Working with.
What about the argument that, well, he could hurt himself, or, that argument that they use to contain him when he's on the drugs? Couldn't you use that as he comes off the drugs?
You could,
if he's conceivably could do something that he didn't realize he was doing and
this whole
potentially hurt himself.
System, it is inhumane, and the parents or the caregivers have to deal with it.
Yeah.
And some people, they kind of stabilize on it. But the thing is that they're irresponsible. It's unconscionable that they don't institutionalize people when they're on them, oftentimes, and when they're getting off of them, and then as they're recycling in and out of psychosis while they're on them. Properly prescribed, you're still going in and out of psychosis all the time. And they honestly have outpatient that tries to deal with it, but honestly, it's not even an iota of the care that they need. And we as parents, we had to pick up the slack. We had to do 24/7, me and my husband.
Niko, do you feel like you want to say anything? Hi, Niko. Do you want to add anything? No? You're good. Okay. It's nice to have your company. Okay, so did anybody ever tell you about the potential side effects or withdrawal symptoms of the drugs before they put him on as an informed consent?
Absolutely never did. Never. They always just said, oh, he'll be, glowing terms, just it's antipsychotic. It'll get rid of his psychosis. They just up the dose until it goes away. Then they send him home. But never a single word. We just have to, they know what it is. And they could tell us, but they don't tell us. They make you think that that's what your symptoms are. It really makes me a little bit, not rage, but I do feel I'm starting to go, hey, these people kind of tricked us. They misinformed us, and they didn't tell us the truth. And we could have made that choice. Do we want to have that symptom or whatever? But no, they don't. They just say, this drug will get rid of your psychosis,
So how do you feel about that? The idea that you might have been lied to?
We're starting to feel kind of like, I have no use for that system. I want to get out. I want to be completely outside of it.
And this may be, in fact, the only real intelligent option left for families like Niko, but this means they carry the full weight with no government help. But the relief of knowing that there are alternatives that are proving effective offers Niko and his family a long-awaited relief and hope of a new day. The greatest antidote and resource of all is one that this family seems not to lack, and that is love, which provides me the full confidence that Niko is going to be all right. I thank them for sharing their story with us today. I send them love and support and prayers, and I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. I'll see you next week, right here on Dialogue.